Hello, I'm Ron Miscavige, and this is Life After Scientology. And that song you just heard to kick this off today is a song I wrote in 1974 that's on my album, which if you go to my website, therealronmiscavige.com, you can go to music and media and go to music and you'll see the album there, and it's called Timeless. You can listen to the other songs or you can buy it if you want to. But that song is called Sicily. And I don't know why I thought it was appropriate for this, but it was a little different for our guest today. He's a special person, and you'll see why once we get into the interview, because he pulled off some stuff that very few people I know would be able to do this. This is a guy with courage, determination, and almost hitting rock bottom, but just not quite at the bottom of the pit. Climbed out and became a terrific success. He's a new friend. I mean, I've known about him. I actually knew about him on the Aftermath. He was on there. And of course, you don't have a chance to tell your whole story. So I invited him on to come and tell his story today. And I think you're going to enjoy this. Well, I don't know if enjoy is the right word, but you will be enlightened as to how horrific the church can be in their treatment of people. Anyway, he also wrote a book, and we're going to spell the name of that book out for you because it's a hell of a title, and unless you know how to spell it, you're not going to be able to get it. So, without any further commercials, except for one, and that is my normal one about inviting you to join Patreon. As you all know, this show is not sponsored by anybody. This is done by Sean and myself. And if you'd care to contribute to the ongoing success of it so we can keep people coming back on and actually expand into other cults, which I absolutely plan on doing. Probably within a month, I can have somebody else on from a different cult that I just spoke to recently. But if you'd like to contribute this, I really invite you to join Patreon and bear a hand in this. And I think you'll feel better if you do that. So please welcome Nathan Rich. Good morning, Rich.
How's it going, man? It's about time I get on this amazing show.
Yeah, it's great. And by the way, Nathan is in Beijing, China. So the miracle of technology, it's a hell of a thing. Boy, I'll tell you, if we were doing this on Bell Telephone like 30 years ago, this goddamn thing would cost us about $3,000 to do an hour. And here it is with the availability of Skype and other things, Hangouts on the air, we're able to do it back and forth. I love it. Yeah, so, Nathan, just to get us started, why don't you do the normal thing that I like people to do, and that is tell us how you got into Scientology, and just we'll kick it off from there. Okay, buddy?
Sure. So I was born into Scientology, and my whole family was, I later found out, considered to be very, very much into Scientology, more so than the average, public person. My mother was OT3, which is a sort of the middle of the sort of ranks of Scientology. And then I had two aunts, both of which were OT. One was OT5, the other one was like OT6 or 7. My grandmother was OT8. My cousins were both Scientologists, right? So that was my whole family. One of my aunts was in the Sea Org, right, which is the sort of kind of like the priesthood of the church, basically, is the way that they describe it, at least. And then my aunt's daughter, my cousin, was in the Cadet Org, which of course is like the kids' version of that. So when I was young, I was raised just by my mother. I never had a father because my mother disconnected from him and his side of the family because they weren't Scientologists and because he had smoked weed, according to her. So I never knew him, and I never had any siblings. And my aunts and my cousins, they didn't live in the same city as me. So when I was very young, under 1, for example, I lived in Tahunga, and then moved to Hollywood, and then Glendale, so all over LA. But they were living in New York and Florida. So it was just my mother and I. And she was a very devout Scientologist. And so And I was very much an asker of why. I was a very inquisitive boy. And so I would constantly ask, why did this happen? How did this happen? What killed the dinosaurs? What's the Ice Age about? What's, how does life work? And she was very responsive and answered all those questions. But to her, and therefore to me, there was no separation between Scientology beliefs and reality. So, in other words, she would never say something like, oh, here's the difference between a gerbil and a hamster. And I believe that the reason that the Ice Age happened is because of the Thetan that tore a hole in the ozone in the atmosphere. She would just say, "Oh, here's the difference between a hamster and a gerbil." And oh, you want to know about the Ice Age? Well, that was the Thetan that came and ripped a hole in the. It was just the same gravity. And so, in my mind, they were just intertwined. My whole
Yeah.
reality was all Scientology as soon as I had any memories.
Right. I see what you're saying. In other words, you were indoctrinated from a baby on up.
Yeah. My first memory is of being in session, actually.
Jesus Christ. Were you
Yeah,
getting that check? Maybe, I mean, they do shit like that, to a kid,
I
Did you ever
was.
steal a
I
cookie?
wasn't. Yeah, I wasn't getting, I wasn't getting like official sec checks, obviously, but I was getting the sort of baby version of that, which is where they kind of ask you, oh, how are you doing today? Oh, anything make you upset? Did you do anything, to your
Yeah.
mommy? That type of thing. And I was laying on the carpet and I was upset. I was crying. I wanted to leave because I wanted to go play. I wanted to go be whatever I thought was like a normal kid.
Yeah.
And, and so my mother obviously got me involved in Scientology schools. Um, Before schools, I went to Scientology daycares. Then I went to a Scientology preschool and got kicked out. And then I went to Scientology first grade, which was Mace Kingsley Preparatory Academy. Okay, so this was a school that was opened by Debbie Mace and Carol Kingsley, and again, Scientology school. I had already by then been going into Scientology courses, Scientology auditing. My mother was a Scientologist. Everything I learned about was all Scientology. And now I was going to Scientology school for the second time. And basically, I didn't do well there either. I had been I had caught a little bit of what I viewed at the time to be abuse um, at the kindergarten that I went to, the daycare that I went to, where they basically stuffed me in this shower and sprayed me down and they rough handled me and they treated me like I was dishes. And for whatever reason, in my mind, that really affected me. And I just had a hard time trusting anybody that wasn't my mom. And so then I just got thrust into these Scientology schools and I just didn't trust the teachers. And that was basically the fundamental problem there, I think. And so I didn't get along well with the teachers, and I didn't really want to learn too much about learning how to learn and how to communicate and the ups and downs of life and the this and the that. It's like I just wanted to learn about animals and
Mm.
like science, like cool stuff that I was interested in. And so I didn't really have like behavioral issues in school. It was just more that I didn't want to do the subjects, and I would talk back in the sense that I would ask these questions that my mother would have answered, but these teachers wouldn't answer. They would just get annoyed.
Yeah.
Um, and so basically, what happened is I got kicked out of that school for talking back, backflash, they called it. And
Yeah.
so my mother tried to send me to a couple other places to kind of occupy my time, the Cub Scouts, and then another place called the Boys Club. And basically, I just was moving around between all these places, and I never could trust anybody. I was kind of closed off individual. I was introverted. I was hyper analytical and smart, but I just didn't have any human connections.
Wow.
And then she kind of got sick of dealing with me, I guess, and she convinced me to go to this fun, amazing ranch outside of LA in nearby Palmdale.
Yeah. Well, let me
And
tell you something. I know about that. Let me just interrupt you there. That's a goddamn reform school. You know that?
Yeah.
Do you know the term reform school or no?
Yeah. It's like, that's like a Catholic reform school, right?
Yeah, in other words, this is a school where I guess it's before you were even born, because this is back in the 40s and 50s. The real bad kids were sent to a reform school, which is like a juvenile detention center, and it's almost like a prison, but it's not. But they tend to think they can reform you by you praying and them beating on you. So anyway, I don't know. This
Right. Well, it
it's
wasn't
amazing
described
what a
that
little
way.
bit of public relations can do, because I always thought the Mace Kingsley thing was Top Gun and everything, but that's how you can get fooled with public relations. In fact, go on with your story. Maybe I shouldn't have interrupted you, but I did. Go ahead.
So, yeah, it certainly wasn't described that way to me. It was described as, a fun place to go camping, and you can, do all this outdoors activity. Oh, you loved the, Cub Scouts. You're going to like this too. And so I went willingly, and my mom drove me out from, at that time we were living in Glendale. So we drove from Glendale to Palmdale, and I began my new life. So at 8 years old, I got sent to the Mace Kingsley Ranch in Palmdale, and that was run by a man named Wally Hanks, and several other security guards there. And it was basically an 8-month long journey into punishment. And the life there was this so-called ranch was really just a house, and Wally and his wife Shauna lived in one room, and then across the little hall there was the girls, who all slept on this one room next to them, and then the boys slept down the hall in the garage that had been renovated to have bunk beds and so on. And in the living room, there was a big picture of L. Ron Hubbard on the wall, and there was, this bookshelf just filled with Dianetics books. And then there was, of course, the ethics books and the admin dictionaries and all that kind of normal Scientology stuff. And, in the interest of time, I won't go through the whole 8 months, but basically there was the standard punishment, which was something that Wally called Susie Q's. Wally was a Vietnam vet, and Susie Q's are basically a military-style jump, squat, push-up. So it's just this complicated and hard push-up. So that would be like the basic. You'd do 25 of those if you cussed, for example. And then the punishments went up from there. So, one time myself and another kid smoked a cigarette that we had found. And so Wally called that playing with fire. And the punishment for playing with fire was 3 paddles. And so during, I don't want to get too locked in all the jargon, but basically during what they called muster, which was a bunch of people getting together, Wally would read these KRs and commendations. So in other words, these reports that are saying you've done something good or you've done something bad. And so he read this report on us saying that we had smoked a cigarette, and then he just said, he said, okay, well, playing with fire. And then he asked one of his security guards to get down the board of justice, he called it, which was this big wooden paddle on the wall that had notches all the way around it. And it said board of justice across it and had holes drilled through it. And he made kids, including myself, bend over the ottoman in front of all the boys and girls and all the staff, bend over, and he would hit us with the paddle. And Maddie, the other kid who had smoked the cigarette with me, he had been there longer than me, and he'd been paddled before. So he had been known to put toilet paper in his underwear if he suspected that he was going to get paddled. And so for him, they took his pants and underwear down to make sure that, yeah. And that was in front of all the boys and girls. And so that's one example. That was the sort of standard hard punishment. And that's what they talked a lot about on the Aftermath show. But actually, that wasn't the worst punishment. That was just the sort of most common bad punishment. Another time when I was 8 there, also with Maddie, basically there was this mentally incapacitated, like mentally non-fully functioning kid there. Okay, he had fallen and hit his head on a brick wall, and so he had been caught, let's just say, doing something. He had been caught masturbating in the bathroom. Okay,
Yeah.
and one of the girls came out and just like blurted it out in the middle of muster, and so he got his own punishments. And then myself and this other kid later on that night, we were kind of joking about it because we didn't know what it was. We were just making jokes about it in bed, and then we went to sleep. We didn't try it. We didn't do anything. And the next morning, there was a knowledge report, like a report that we had done something bad, saying that we were trying to masturbate. And we immediately were like, no, 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 we weren't. And of course, because a teenager had written it, it must be true. And so Wally called that out 2D, which in Scientology, language basically means you're doing something unethical that has to do with sex or family. And I remember thinking to myself, like, how could that even be out 2D? Like touching yourself? How is that? Could
Yeah.
that even be wrong? But I didn't have a lot of time to think about it, because then he doled out the punishments, which wasn't paddles. He basically he read it to himself, and then he just said, you guys are doing 200 Suzy Q's in fresh horse shit. And so he had that mentally damaged guy named Buddy. He told Buddy to go out to the horse corrals and scoop up fresh manure, while he told me and Maddie to strip down. And so we stripped down in front of all the boys and girls and the staff. And then we went out to the corrals, and by then it was cold. It was freezing, actually. And, this hot, steaming manure on the frozen ground, and we were down to our underwear. And so it was a slippery and horrible mess. They made us get in there and do our 200, jump, squat, push-ups, which it actually just takes a long time. So we were just in there for a very long time in front of everybody, mostly naked and just being covered with the filth. And so that's another example of what they would do there.
You realize how insane this is? This
Uh,
is goddamn crazy.
yeah.
Jesus Christ, man.
And before each of the punishments, what he would do, like for example, when he's paddling you, you're bending over the ottoman, and it's positioned so that as you're bending over the ottoman, L. Ron Hubbard's picture is in front of your face. And so he's telling you to look at L. Ron Hubbard. And then he's also, while he hits you, he'll tell you things like, I don't like to do this. You shouldn't have made me do this. And like he would put the pressure on you, that, like the blame on you. And if you try to fight back against any of these things, he'll bring out the Scientology ethics book and read to you from, the ethics conditions or any other justifications in there, and show you why you need to be punished. But he was also sure not to call it punishment, but he would call it penalties. We're gonna give you you've been penalized. And there was more, there was more similar abuses.
In other words, they try to degrade you even at a young age, so that if they degrade you enough and start giving you information about that quote technology of Scientology, you'd say, well, I don't really deserve this, but I'm going to do my best to see if I can deserve receiving this technology. I'll tell you something, man. This is like brainwashing at its worst with little kids. It's sickening. I'll tell you. It's just, it really is sickening, right, Nathan?
And you're right, because after those things happen, you don't just go back and you're fine. Now you're in what they call lower conditions. And so now you have to do a bunch of more steps that ends, of course, with you going around and getting signatures from everybody who accepts you back into the group as you're apologizing to them, to show them, how sorry you are for betraying them. So you would have to do that after your paddling, after,
right.
Your punishments. So another time, for example, basically I tried to tell my mother that this was happening. And what they did is that Wally would walk around with my mother, because she would come out most months, once a month, not every month, but most of them. And Wally would walk around with her, and then I would tell her, I told her that he hit me with this stick. And then Wally just said, hey, hang on, go clean. I'm going to talk with your mother. And then my mom sided with him and said, yeah, let me talk to him. And then she came and find me afterwards and said, she used to call me Nay back then. She said, Nay, you're really out ethics and you need to get your ethics in. I saw the KRs. I saw the reports on you. And that was it. As soon as he just showed her these reports, which, by the way, every kid had, because there's nothing else to do there but write reports on each other. So everybody had good reports and bad reports about everything. But if your parents, or in my case, parent, if there's ever a situation where like this that comes up, they will show your parent all these reports. Oh, look how bad he's been this week. Look at all these reports. And it makes it seem like you're the bad one causing all this trouble. And then, and honestly, this is what I tell myself. I tell myself that she didn't believe me, but I don't know if she did or not. She may have believed me.
I got to tell you, this is the worst position a kid can be in, because you're too young to fight back and you have no recourse except just to take it. It's unbelievable to me. It really is. I mean, as a father, when my kids were growing up, I would back them up against anybody. If somebody came over, we weren't always Scientologists. We didn't get into, I guess my kids were between 10 and about 13 years old. But if somebody come over and complained, I'd back them off. And then when I closed the door in the house, I said, okay, did you do it? And then he'd confess to me, and I handled it as internal laundry. And I gave him maybe a little work thing to do. And when they did their work amends, I never brought it up again. That was how it went. So they knew that they had protection from their old man, who's, a U.S. Marine, a little bit nuts. Because I say you got to be a little bit nuts to join the Marines. And I got to tell you, I qualified on that. But it's hard for me to imagine a kid growing up in a place that's supposed to enhance your life, and you have some son of a bitch with the board hitting you on the ass. Go on. Continue, buddy.
Yeah. So after I told her that, then she left and she didn't come back. I think she took 2 months or something to come back. And then in the meantime, what they did is they did a quick punishment on me called the trough. And the trough was something that I didn't even know existed back then, which is called a horse trough, which is this huge, aluminum, basically it looks like a bathtub. And that's what the horses drink their water out of. And in Palmdale in the winter, it gets very cold, and that water will freeze over with 4 inches of ice on there. And so what they did is they just grabbed me by my hands and my wrists and my ankles and just threw me in there, just to show me that they are still in charge. And then like another example is when I was young, I was 30. I was a kid running around. I wasn't worried about cleaning, and I only liked to take baths for some reason, probably because of that incident at the daycare center where they showered me down. I don't know, but for whatever reason, I just didn't like showers. I like to take baths.
Yeah.
But at the ranch, boys couldn't take a bath. There was no bathtub. There was only for the girls. The boys had to go outside to this big like communal wooden stall basically and shower that way. So long story short, I didn't shower much. And so one day Wally read a knowledge report. It just said, he just read it out loud, as he always did. And it said, Nathan is very dirty. And he didn't even bother finishing it. He just said, yes, he is. And then he said to one of his enforcer security guys named Scott, he said, Scott, GI shower. And I didn't know what that meant. Basically, they took me out to that shower stall, everybody with us, all the girls and boys and staff, stripped me down, and then took a wooden fence brush with stainless steel bristles and basically scraped my skin with it, being careful not to leave marks because they knew my mother would be coming. And that's what they called a GI shower, was they basically just scrubbed me down, and all the boys and girls watched. And that was Scott Hewlett. And so there was so that was the ranch. There was more to say about it, obviously, because it was 8 months of fun. But basically what happened, the way that I got out, is that my grandfather was the only person in my family who wasn't a Scientologist. he wasn't against it. He just didn't feel like he needed it.
Yeah.
And my grandmother was getting higher and higher. She was OT8. She was doing her L rundowns, and she just started putting more and more pressure on him to become a Scientologist. And it became so much that they separated after 39 years. And he died while they were separated.
Wow.
He went, crazy, going, I killed my husband. I killed my husband. And he was the breadwinner of the family. Okay. And this all happened while I was at the ranch.
Yeah.
So the whole family just broke into pieces, and they took me out of the ranch. And my mother and I hung out in Glendale while she tried to close off her, basically wrap things up, and then moved me out to Florida because everyone in the family started migrating down to Florida because of course, that's where the headquarters of Scientology is meant to be. And
Yeah.
so I uplifted and moved out to there. And on top of that, had no way to discuss any of these things that happened to me because either my mother didn't believe me, and I really can't bring it up now that her dad is dead, my grandfather, or she did believe me and she wanted that to happen to me, and I can't talk to her about it. So when I was turning, I was 8, turning 9, and I got out, and I basically just had to keep that all to myself, and then moved to Florida. And by the way, at no point in this story have I finished one single grade of school at all, nor do I have any friends for longer than half of a school year.
Wow.
So now I'm in Florida, 9, 10 years old, in that area, and I'm living with my grandmother, who believes that she just killed her husband of 40 years, and there's no
That's
one else there.
She's the one who was OT8 and she couldn't get him to get on the bridge. Is that it?
Right.
Okay.
So she's OT8 and I'm some kid, and my mom is in California, and my aunt and cousin are in New York, and my other aunt and my other cousin are in the Sea Org. So it's just me and my grandmother living in this apartment right after she feels like she had done this. So she blamed herself, and the sisters, right, my mother and aunts, they blamed him, but I blamed Scientology.
Yeah.
And but of course I didn't talk about it, but this is, to me, it felt like everything would have been fine if you didn't pressure him. So anyway, so I was in kind of a doubtful state about, I mean, I still believed the reality of Scientology and the nature of everything around me, and Thetans and the whole track. That was all normal to me. But being a Scientologist didn't seem to be helpful to me, even at that young age. And
again, how old were you at that point?
8, 9.
Okay.
And so, I mean, I knew about thetans and past lives and implants and fifth invader force and all that stuff, literally as long as I can remember, even or younger than that. I was never the person that didn't know about that stuff. And this, I think, is I didn't find out till later that this is different than a lot of Scientologists, but I was just raised with that stuff the whole time. So for me, that was all still true. But now I was starting to doubt that being a Scientologist was helpful, because I was starting to realize that I didn't have a father. And my grandmother on my father's side, she used to send me presents, even though I had never met my father. And then one year they just stopped, and she just stopped sending them. And of course, I later found out it's because my mother told them to stop communicating with me. But even at the time when I didn't know that, I just remember thinking, why don't I have a father? There was such a missing part of my life.
Yeah.
And I started attributing that to Scientology. And then now my grandfather was gone, and I was the only male in the family. And I was 8. And so anyway, so there I was in Florida. And then eventually I was there living with her for about 6 months, which was really another big splinter in my mind about Scientology, because this is an OT8. And when you're 8 years old, what you know OT8 to be is indistinguishable from Jesus or Buddha. I mean, this person can control everything with their mind.
Yeah.
So how did she lose her husband? Why is she this totally overcome with grief widow mess in front of me? Which this is the type of thing that sounds cold to people that are outside of Scientology, but you have to understand, again, wouldn't it seem weird if you saw a Buddha totally overcome with grief and unable to handle his own relationship? Wouldn't
Of
that
course
seem
it would.
weird? You know what I mean? It's not that I mean, I thought she was normal. I felt horrible for her. It was a horrible experience for her, and I can never imagine that pain. But at the same time, I still was wondering, how is that even possible? Like, how is that even physically possible, given that I know for a fact that OT8s could fucking fly in the air if they wanted to,
Yeah.
you know? And so that was another big problem for me. So then my mother came out, and then I went back to, school, which was another another Scientology school, and basically it was just the same thing. I just didn't do well there. I couldn't connect with anybody there. The teachers just seemed to suck. They didn't want to teach me real subjects. They wanted to teach me, again, communicating about this and learning how to that and whatever. It's like, I just want to learn about dinosaurs. I want to learn about what are saber-tooth tigers. These things are cool.
Yeah.
So got kicked out again for backflash. My grades were C's and D's. It just was not working out. So basically then what happened is seventh grade came around. I'm kind of obviously skipping some stuff.
All right.
Now, when I was living with my grandmother, let me just mention a couple things. After I got out of the ranch, when I was still in Glendale for a short window of time, I was 8 years old, and I went into my kitchen, and when my mother wasn't there, and I got a steak knife and I put it to my heart and I turned it to feel it twist my skin. And I thought about killing myself, and I thought about the pain and the emotion my mother would have seeing me bloody on the floor, and I didn't do it. And that was when I was 8. When I was living with my grandmother, okay, right after that, when I was about 10-ish, I wanted to kill myself again. And so I left my grandmother in the apartment and I went outside. I didn't want her to find it because she was already so emotionally upset. So I went out to a road and I just laid in the middle of the street, and I didn't know how to kill myself. So I just thought, I'll just get run over. And I just laid out there for what felt like 20 minutes, and no cars came, no people came, nothing happened. It was like the whole world stopped for me. And so that was the first time that I had suicidal thought when I was 8, and I actually attempted suicide when I was 10. And then, okay, so now going back to the sort of present. Okay, so I went to that Scientology school in Florida, and it didn't work out. And then I ended up, 7th grade rolls around. Okay, so now I'm let's see, what are you in 7th grade? 11, 12? I
But
think
like
12.
12 or 13, I would say.
Yeah.
If you started school at 6, add 6 grades, then do 12.
12. Yeah.
7th grade
So
would be like 13 years old. Yeah.
yeah, so I'm around 12 years old now. My mother has run out of Scientology schools. Okay, there's none left to go to because I've already been kicked out of all of them. Again, not for fighting, not for trying to burn the place down or for killing people, for talking back, for not wanting to do the Scientology stuff, for just wanting to focus on learning about the world around me, and I want it to be normal. So I go to my first private school that's not a Scientology school. Okay. Keep in mind now, I'm 12 years old, still have not finished one single grade. Not
Jesus
one.
Christ.
I skipped preschool. I skipped, I think it was 2nd grade, and I skipped, I believe, 5th grade. So basically, due to all this moving around, I ended up skipping 3 grades. All the other grades, I never finished one single grade. 7th grade comes around. It's the first private school that's not a Scientology school. It's a school called Dunedin Academy in Dunedin, Florida. And I get this teacher named Frank Unitowski. He's a man from Boston. And he gives me that thing that I couldn't articulate before that I actually needed, which is individualized, personalized attention, teaching me about the world, not about Scientology, but about the world. And my mind expanded so rapidly. I learned about math and English and writing and reading. I read books, and my grades went from C's and D's and F's to B's and A's, and then by eighth grade, still had the same teacher. My grades went to A's and A pluses, and by the end of eighth grade, there were literally 100% all A pluses in every category, every subject, everything. And they even named me the junior high valedictorian officially.
Wow.
Like, I still have the paperwork that says it. And so um, I had gone from a just abysmal student, because I was like trying to not do all this stuff anymore. I just wanted to learn normal stuff, to the top student in several grades.
That's fabulous. Well, look, take the goddamn suppression off the kid. Give him a little freedom to express himself and do what they did with you, and look how you blossomed right off there.
Yeah, those were like the 2 years of my life that, as a youngster, that I was really winning as
Wow.
in school, and it was the only time that I was in private non-Scientology school. So then a big problem happened when I started ninth grade, high school. Okay, so I'm 13, turning 14, and um, basically what happens is, because it's a K through 12 school, now I don't get Frank Unitowski for all of my classes. For whatever reason, high school was set up differently. Now I get a different teacher for all my subjects. And long story short, I didn't get along with the other teachers like I did with Mr. U. Mr. U and we trusted each other. We had this bond. He was just the best teacher in the world. And the other ones, to me, were just teachers. I didn't have any connection with them. So my grades started suffering, and I started panicking. I didn't know what to do. So I asked my mother for emancipation, right? Because I needed to get out of the Scientology life. All the pressure started back with the courses in Scientology and all this stuff. And I was living in Clearwater, and it just was overwhelming. So I tried to get legal emancipation, when I was 14, but she said no, right? Which was probably a good move. And she was really upset by it. She actually pushed me down the hallway, and that was the only time either of us ever got physical. She pushed me down the hallway because I asked her for emancipation. So I thought about, how can I get out of this situation? I know my grades are going to go down again. I know they are.
Yeah.
I'm going to fail at school. There was kids dealing drugs. I got pushed out of a window on these other classes. It just wasn't working. So then I thought, okay, I know that Sea Org members don't really do processing. They don't really do a lot of auditing. They're usually just working all the time. And
Right.
this was my impression. So I've got it. I've got this great idea. I know how to get independence from my mother. I know how to not have to do Scientology stuff and keep the whole family happy and not have to be in that school anymore. I'll join the Sea Org. So ironically, to get away from Scientology, I went into the Sea Org. I
That
joined
is the first time I've ever heard a person joining a Sea Org to get free. You're jumping from the frying pan into the fire.
Yeah.
But at the time, I can see your thinking. You're right. You wouldn't have to be an emancipated minor. She'd have to sign for you to go in the Sea Org, right?
Right. But she'd love to.
It was brilliant.
Yeah. So this is how my mind was working. Now, I mentioned this in the book, but in retrospect, this one decision was probably the worst decision of my life. This probably had the most impact of everything that I did and everything that happened to me in my entire life, because of what happens next.
I can see it. Hey, listen, I did it.
So I joined the Sea Org, and I signed my billion-year contract. And I was for the people that know Scientology lingo, I was in the FSO at FLB. I was a senior CS assistant, basically, and what that means to normal humans is I was basically an assistant of a guy who's very high up. So I was kind of in the high echelon, but I was the very lowest of that. So basically, I was in charge of nobody. I was a nobody, basically. So, but I didn't care. So I got my own little apartment, and I got $20 a week or something like that. And, that lasted a few months, basically. And because I wasn't really doing it for the right reasons, obviously. So I got, I just left and I just went back home. I routed out. And so I was still 14, back at home. Now it's the middle of the school year. And I, again, didn't finish ninth grade. And so my mother basically tells me, okay, why don't you go to this other school? It's called Light School. It's another Scientology school, but don't worry, your friend so-and-so is there. And so I said, okay. So August of, this is now 1996. August of 1996 rolls around and she convinces me to go to this new school. It starts in September, she tells me. September 2nd, Monday. I wake up, no school. She says, oh, actually, it's the next day. It's September 3rd. Wake up September 3rd, no school. She says, you need to get more sleep, da-da-da-da. It's tomorrow for sure. So I go to sleep Tuesday, September 3rd. I wake up September 4th, 1996 at approximately 8:15 in the morning. I'm feeling somebody at the foot of my bed. I think it's my mother, but that's very out of character for her. Why would she be in my room messing around on my bed? Open my eyes, and it's Scott Hewlett, the guy who scrubbed my arms with the metal fence brush, who got down for Wally, sitting on my bed. And he says, hey, Nate, you remember me? So he and another security guard tried to convince me to go back to the ranch. Okay. And I in the interest of time, again, won't go through the whole thing, but basically they tried to get me to go for about an hour. And when I first woke up, I was listening to them. So I was packing up clothes and stuff. And as I started to wake up, I realized, like, wait, this is America. They can't just take me out of my home. Right. So I was like, no. I just said, no way, no. And basically at the end of it, they said, we have to go because we have a flight and it's leaving. So you're going. And Scott grabbed my foot. By then I was laying on my bed with my back to the wall, and he grabbed my foot, and I kicked him in the face. And he grabbed my arm and he twisted it behind my back. And I started screaming for my mom, and he was dragging me out of my room and through the hallway, and I was kicking and screaming, mom, mom. And he got me to the kitchen, and my mother was sitting there at the small dining table that we had. And she had some papers in front of her that she had clearly been reading or signing. And she just had this grin on her face. And she didn't say anything to me, and she didn't move, and she just smiled at me. And it was this really weird grin that kind of said, like, now you see, now you get it. And, my mother, I understand that when people read my books, my mother does not come off as being any kind of hero. Normally speaking, I would not consider that she would do this kind of thing. It's not like, I loved my mother more than anything, and she seemed to be some other person in this moment. So anyway, they dragged me literally kicking and screaming from my home, stuffed me in this car, and drove me out to the airport, where 2 armed police officers were waiting to receive us.
Jesus Christ.
The original security, there was 2 security guards in my home. One of them left to go pick up another kid. So then it was just me, the security guard, and 2 armed police officers going through the airport. So we skipped all the lines, skipped everything, and just went straight to the airplane. And then they flew us out to Albuquerque. And when Scott was telling me about the ranch, he said it was in New Mexico. And then I said, like, where are we going? And they said Albuquerque. And at the time, I thought that New Mexico was the capital of Mexico. And I thought that Albuquerque was a city in Canada. So I had no idea where I was going at all. I was totally disoriented. And so it flew for a few hours, landed in Albuquerque, and then drove me down for another 3.5 to 4 hour drive away from Albuquerque, way down into the Gila wilderness, into the Mace Kingsley Ranch again, only this time it had moved to what I later found out to be a part of America called New Mexico. And it was the Gila wilderness. Finally got there at night, and the guy who was driving us, as soon as we got in, it was this huge redneck truck. I mean, it was like a F-350 diesel super cab, you know, huge,
Yeah.
ridiculous truck. Got in there, and there's this big guy looks at me and he says, "Hey, I'm Paul. I'm Wally's nephew." And I said, I just like couldn't believe it. So I finally get out into the middle of nothing, just darkness and woods for literally hours. And then they just pull up to what I thought was just a random hill. And then another security guard from the original ranch named Ross shows up with a flashlight and takes me out of the truck. The truck leaves, and I'm with this Ross guy who I knew from the first ranch in total blackness of night, and he's going up this mountain with a flashlight, and I'm like running behind him, like, wait. And I knew by the way that he was walking in front of me that I was really screwed, because that means he didn't even need to watch me. There's nowhere to go. I knew that that's what. So we got all the way up into nothing. There was just this cabin in the woods with no roof and a tiny little campfire. It was very late, so everybody was, you know, anybody that was there would have been sleeping. And he said, "Where's your stuff?" And I said, "You know, I don't know. They didn't send any stuff. Scott said that, oh, they'll send it later." So I have nothing. I just have the clothes on my back. So he picked up a sleeping bag from the dirt, and he tossed it to me, and I grabbed it, and he said, go to bed. He took me inside the cabin, laid me down. He went back outside where I already knew that he was going to be up all night waiting, watching night watch. And I laid down, and I'm looking up at the stars because there's no roof, and there's little sleeping bags around me if people are sleeping. And I'm just looking up there. I'm just thinking, like, I can't believe this, you know. And then I just hear this voice coming from the darkness over here, and it says, "Do you take pride in your race?" And I just look back up, and I just think, like, what the fuck? And I just said, "Not really." And then there was no more conversation, and then I just eventually fell asleep. And that was my first night at the Mace Kingsley Ranch in New Mexico.
Wow. This is a fucking horror story. This is hard to imagine that this is happening.
Yeah. So I stayed at and you know, I won't go through all the details, but I stayed at that ranch for 3 years. And my mother told the ranch not to allow me to talk to my family anymore until I graduated, until I finished the program. So for the better part of 3 years, I was not allowed to have any communication with my family in writing, no calls, nothing. And my stuff didn't get sent out. So I just had nothing. I just only had the clothes that I was wearing. So eventually I learned that the area that I was in with the cabin with no roof, that was like a special punishment area. And eventually I got to go down to the main area. But that took a long time because, you know, we tried to escape. We tried to steal cars, and we had this big plan where we lit a forest fire, and a couple of the kids were going to hotwire one of the trucks and try to meet us on the path. And we were going to drive to Mexico and just run away in Mexico, but it didn't work out. And so eventually I got to go down to the main area. And then that's where they took me to this enormous woodshed because they had the kids chopping wood. They call it mest work, which you know what that is, but basically like getting your ethics in through work, cleansing you through hard labor. And he took me to the woodpile, and there was this trash bag in it. And he said, "There you go, reach inside, anything you want, you can have." And I opened it up, and it was like abandoned clothes from kids, and that had already been picked through by other kids. So it was like all the clothes that literally nobody wanted. And that's where I got my first next set of clothes. I still didn't have socks or anything. I mean, I just was really fucked. And over those 3 years, most of the kids, and when I say most, I mean almost all of them, got to go home for Christmas and or their birthdays. They got presents. Their parents sent them money, cigarettes, candy, whatever they were allowed to send them. Their parents would come visit them. Not me. Never. I was the guy who, from 14 to 17, never saw my family. And I became known as like the most neglected kid there as far as from the I mean, it got so bad that literally one Christmas, the ranch gave me a present, because they don't give anybody presents. They gave me a present, and it was a sock with an orange in it, and something else like that. I don't remember what else it was, but there was that type of thing. It's like, well, here's something, anything. And I had been there for so long by the end of this 3 years that I was there longer than the people who ran the place. I was there longer than the ethics officers and the auditors and I had been there longer than almost everyone. So I was like this old man in the ranch. And my best friend at that time, he long story short, ended up leaving and coming back as a staff member. Okay, so he became trusted. And I was just, by this time I was 17. I didn't care about anything anymore. My life was it was over. As far as I was concerned, I was dead already. And it was the absolute betrayal in my mind. And I just felt like my life was over. And
Oh, it was a betrayal. Not just in your mind, in real life. And this school, this was Scientology approved. Is that right? In other words, this is a place where they practice Scientology. Is that it?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It was. I mean, the daily routine was courses, auditing. They had a master at arms. They had bosuns, muster, KRs, commendations. They had all the green balls, the red balls. They had, I mean, you name it. I mean, I have pictures of myself there with freaking, L. Ron Hubbard books all over the place, and it was. I mean, the people that ran the ranch at various times were like, for example, Shirley Young was like one of the top CMO people in the Sea Org, and she also ran the ranch. And her kid was there, and that kind of stuff. And so it was definitely. I mean, Sea Org members came and checked the place out occasionally, right? People from Wise came, so it was very, very much part of a Scientology.
Yeah. So to make sure you're having a miserable existence, it's sick. It's disgusting. I got to tell you. So continue on. Now you're 17 years old. What happens then?
So my best friend, who came back as a staff member, he was kind of like me in a sense that he was the other person that had been there basically forever, right? His parents actually cared about him and stuff, but he had also, for whatever reason, been there a long time. Anyway, we're very close. And so he, unlike me, he had a bunch of friends outside of the ranch. He was raised in Albuquerque, and all his friends were there. Like me, if you remember my story, I was raised all over the place, and I never really had any friends. But he did. So he started to do these Albuquerque runs where he would go like on the weekend or whatever, and he'd go supervise kids in Albuquerque. But meanwhile, he would go and get alcohol and drugs from his friends, and he would bring them back into the ranch. And so I started living with him because I'd been there so long that I sort of had that seniority of just, he's always been here. And so I convinced them, oh, well, Nathan hasn't, done anything wrong anymore. So, we'll just let him live with Johnny. The guy's name was Johnny. So Johnny and I lived in this barn. And, when I was 15, I again tried to kill myself at this ranch. Only this time I took an entire extra strength bottle of Tylenol, and I thought I was dying, but I didn't die, obviously. And after they didn't do anything, actually. They didn't take me to a doctor, no nurse, nothing, which was actually really surprising to me. But I was very sick for about a week. I was all screwed up. And after that, of course, they punished me and put me on ISO watch, which is like the isolation, like suicide watch. Anyway, so the way that I got those ibuprofens was from an Albuquerque run, where I had finally been able to get, like after a year, I had finally been trusted enough to go to Albuquerque, which is what you had to do if you wanted to like buy socks. So I had to basically do a bunch of laundry and work for one of the staff members to earn $1 each time I helped them, to get that money together, and then do enough Scientology stuff so I was trusted enough to go with staff members to Albuquerque in a van to go directly to a store and buy stuff and then go directly back. And that's how I got socks. And then I snuck buying a bottle of extra strength Tylenol. So anyway, now I'm back to 17 again. Johnny was taking kids on those types of runs. And so he was getting alcohol and drugs, bringing them back, and me and him were just doing them. We couldn't trust anybody else. We already knew that. The culture in there was similar to jail, like you said. Everybody's ratting each other out because they're trying, everybody's together, and then, oh, hey, man, I want to get out of here, and then they tell on you. So we knew he knew I was never going to get out of there, never. And I knew he was trustworthy. So he started bringing in methamphetamine, marijuana, and rum. The very first thing he brought back was rum and a bag of weed. And then the next thing that came in was methamphetamine. And then basically we started getting LSD, and then we started getting more stuff. And we kind of worked out what was safe to do there. All these drugs had a lot of problems because, like, if you drink a bottle of alcohol, you're going to be doing dumb things. So when the night watch comes down, they may smell it. They may hear you being drunk. What are you going to do with the bottle? There's all these like problems. Weed is how it's always smoke going everywhere. So it turned out that for us, LSD was the best because
Jesus Christ.
You can't detect it. I mean, if it's in eyedroppers, what do they just think is eyedropper, and it doesn't smell like anything. The only way that you can tell if somebody's on LSD, other than the fact that they're tripping out like a psycho, is that their eyes are dilated. So what we did is we just wore sunglasses all the time, and we practiced on LSD with each other on how to like be not so high that it was obvious and just high enough where you couldn't really tell. And so we're just getting doses and doses and doses of acid, and we just did more and more drugs until literally we were high on acid every single day and night, all day and all night.
Good
And
Lord. Just to get a little relief from the goddamn situation you're in, right?
Exactly. For me, and that's another reason that LSD was the best for me, because that's the one that just takes you away immediately. You're gone now. You're just in another world. This world doesn't exist anymore. And so I actually got a sec check where they asked me if I had ever done LSD while I was on LSD, and I said no, and I passed it. So I mean, I talk about that in the book too, of sort of how I thought about that and that whole experience and what my tactic was to try to trick the e-meter. Because of course, like I said, in my mind, the e-meter worked. In my mind, Scientology was real. I just didn't want to do it. And so I had this strategy of like how to defeat that. And I talk about on the book my experience of what that was like on acid, to be in this weird situation on this electrodes and having this guy trying to interrogate you. And so as I started to get closer to 18, magically all of the staff members suddenly were all my best friend and wanted me to graduate, because of course if I turn 18 and walk out the front door, I'm not a good statistic for them. They can't say, oh, he's a graduate,
right?
He's some kid that was there for 3 years and nobody cared about him, and then he left, which looks bad for them. So suddenly all of a sudden, they're just rushing me through everything. Oh, just do that, done, and they're checking off all these things. And so then literally in the span of like 2 months, all of a sudden I go from persona non grata to I'm getting on the phone with my mother because I'm on one of the last steps of the program. I mean, that's how quick it magically went. And so I call my mother up, and I obviously I talk about this in the book too, but basically that's all sort of smoothed over, but it's just a bunch of me apologizing and getting their signatures, accepting me back in the group, and it's all my fault and everything. And then I graduate the ranch and I go back to Florida. And so now I'm 17 and I'm back in Florida, and I can't talk to my mom. I can't talk to anyone in my family about what's happened to me, or, who am I supposed to talk to? I don't even have any friends anymore. So my life was I was really in trouble. And my mother got me a job at a place called Beauty Marks, which was a Scientology company on Cleveland in Hollywood. In Clearwater. So she was working there and I was working there. And she's a Scientologist, obviously. And that's a Scientology place run by a lady named Vicky Galzade. And then she introduced me to this girl who became my girlfriend, who was also a Scientologist that also worked there. And her father was also a Scientologist that also worked there. And then when I wasn't working there, because I was basically too old to start school because I was 17, then I was going into auditing and courses and going home and hearing my mom, be a Scientologist. And my entire life, again, was 100% Scientology. And it was even worse now because my mother had all this high expectation of like, oh, he's a graduate now. He's reformed. He's, rebuilt. And so I just, long story short, I ran away within 2 months. I was like, all right, I can't take this anymore. It's over. And I just ran away to go live with that kid, Johnny. And basically, I tried to call my mom and tell her, look, I'm sorry, I regret it, like almost immediately. I want to go back. I want to return. And she said no. And she said, don't contact the family again. I asked for my aunt's number. She refused to give it to me. The only thing she offered to do, because I had run away to Seattle, the only thing she offered to do was give me the number of her friend Scott, but I have no idea who that was, who worked at the church in Seattle, so that I could maybe do my pure off. That was it. And so she made it very clear that the family didn't want to hear from me again. And I know that we're running out of time, so I'll just say this. That began a 7-year period of homelessness and extreme drug abuse and overdoses in my life at 17.
God damn. Well, Scott, Scott, no, I mean, sorry, Nathan. We're coming up to the hour mark in about 5 minutes, and I don't want to shortchange what happened to you after that. Do you follow me?
Yeah. I mean, we're at about half the story, to be honest with you.
Well, you know what I'm going to do, and I hate to do it for our listeners but I got to tell the listeners, listen, you got to listen to this next episode, whenever it is, because this has a great ending. But just realize what he experienced. I hate to say this. I wish it were the only time it happened to anybody. This is quite common with a lot of people who end up in situations like him, where they're young, they have no hope of uh, any recourse to talk back or fight their way out of something, and they're forced into a situation where, as Nathan described his life, which was a miserable goddamn existence. So, how about if we continue this in another episode, Nathan? Is that okay with you?
Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah.
Yeah, because I know, because we've had talks about this, and I know what happens, and the end is going to blow you away, and you see what happened to him. But for right now, um, we're going to end at this point, and please look forward to this. You know, if you're not a subscriber, you should subscribe so you know when the next episode is coming up. It's not going to be next week because I already have somebody else lined up. It potentially could be the week after that, but there's another guest I have, and if we can move that around, I'd like to have you back in about 2 weeks, if that's okay with you, Nathan.
Yeah, should be fine. Yeah.
Yeah, this is good. But wait, before we go off, for Christ's sake, you got to talk about your book. No, just give the name of the book.
Okay. So if people are too impatient and they want to find out the rest of the story, or if you just kind of want to get more detail about what we've already talked about, for example, obviously I go into way more detail and everything like that. So the book is called Scythe Telepo, and so that's spelled scythe like the Grim Reaper's scythe. So that's SCYTHE. And then Teleppo is not a real word, and that's just TLEPPO. And that's, when I was doing research on names for a book, top two, things that they recommended was, number one, don't use things that are hard to spell, and number two, don't use things that are hard to remember. And I just said, you know what?
You went right against the grain on that one.
I got an F on that one. But the thing is, it's one of those things where, like, it doesn't really make any sense. And then when you read the book, hopefully you also feel like, oh, right, that's the only thing you really could have called this book. That's the only thing that makes sense for this book.
That's a great hook, because I'll tell you this, I'm going to read it. And again, it's SCYTHETLEPPO.
Correct. Right. And
okay, so people who are watching this, if they didn't get it, they can pause the interview, go back and play it again. So, and you can get it on Amazon.
Yeah, and you can add a link on there. I can send you the link as well. Yeah, it's not. I mean, look, I don't hide names. I don't change the events. I don't blame everybody. I don't blame myself. I just say, look, this is what happened and how I felt about things at the time, and and what was going on in my head, and here's the events of my life. And my purpose with this book is to have people read it and identify things in their life maybe that hearing my story might help them to overcome. I want people to understand, but we'll get into that when we get to the second part.
Yeah, and I'll tell you this, I can tell you because we've discussed it, and I know how this is going to end, and it has a fantastic ending. I mean, it's almost like a movie, because when you see what he does to pull himself up by his own bootstraps, you're not going to believe how he ended up in the position he did, as we're talking right now. So I'm gonna end this episode, but I got to put in a plug for any of you out there who would like to help out to keep this as an ongoing enlightenment time, and become a Patreon. I don't care if it's $1 or $2 or 10 or 100, whatever you'd like. I would appreciate it very much. It does help us. And with that in mind, and also become a subscriber so you'll know when the next show is coming up. I want to thank you, Nathan, very much for taking the time for this. And we'll talk to you in the future so our audience can get the ending to this, which they're going to enjoy. For right now, though, I'd like to say thanks for tuning in. And I'm Ron Miscavige, and this is Life After Scientology. See you on the next episode.